Hi everyone, I'm Valentin Moser from Project Felis, and in this video I will show you different ways of how to compile a species list for your trip report. One of the easiest methods, and probably also often the most straightforward one, is just to write a trip list based on your memory and the observations you recorded. I record my observations as a naturalist, and here it's very easy. If I show with my latest trip around Vienna, just to zoom in and select the area where I did observations, and it will show me the total list of observations, but also species. And even if I'm a bit unsure where it was, very easy to look at. So the hedgehog, not quite sure yet. Sure, when I was writing the trip report, where was that again? So I have the observation here. I can go to the observation, and under details, I can even copy paste or copy the coordinates in case I want to put those in the trip report. So very easy and straightforward way to have an overview of your trip list in case you're using iNaturalist or a similar website and record all your observations. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to use John's life list as a base for doing a trip list. And this is actually future me with longer hair and more spring outside, because since I've recorded the video, John has updated his life list, or his mammal list, I have to say, his life list as well, I guess. And there have been some changes, which is very beneficial for the people who start working with this new list. So for example, now there is a combined column for the Latin species name, and we don't have the problem anymore of the first 3 hidden lines. However, as a lot of you probably are still working with an old version of the list from John, I decided to keep the old video, but you can just skip the parts that don't apply to your list anymore. Now for the next method, this is the one I use for most of my trip reports. I show you how I take advantage of John's list on mammalwatching.com. We go to Resources, Global Mammal Checklist, and then we download the Excel. And we have to do some modifications on that Excel in order to use it efficiently. The first thing we do is a copy, create the copy, and we call that copy My Mammals, and that's the version we're gonna work with. The reason is, in case anything goes wrong, we delete the part we shouldn't have deleted, it's still there in the original one. Because we don't have access to the first 3 lines, we have to unfreeze the windows, unfreeze the panes, and we can delete those first 3 lines. The next thing we do is to add a column which we just number in the order that it is now. We zoom out a bit, otherwise this takes forever, but we can drag it down on the corner. The reason why we do that is in case we want to get back to the original order, we can just use that. That's quite helpful, because you would want your species list in the taxonomical order that makes sense. It takes a while to get down there. Is certainly better ways to do this, but we want to keep it as simple as possible. And once we are at the very bottom, we have to make sure to include also the line with the total in case we want to use this quite helpful function. Now we have sorted. Now, the next thing I did was I added a column named Latin, and here I combined this box and this box, so the genus and the species, and the goal is to have it in the same text box. The reason for that is that this makes it way easier to search for species in case you know the Latin name, for example, but also later for the trip report because you have the Latin name as well as the common name in one text box, in one field each. And we can combine it with a formula. For that, you can, for example, Google merge two columns Excel, and it is this formula that we need. Copy paste that, and then we just need to adapt it to our purposes. Same game than before. We need to drag it down all the way. So to explain a bit better, now if I am unsure about an English name, a common name, and these are all, there is different versions and so on. If I know that this dormouse thing I saw, I'm not sure if it's fat dormouse or what was, but I know it's glis glis. Now with this version, I can search glis glis, whereas before I could only search glis. Same story again, make sure you go all the way down. There we go. Now, I make it a bit bigger. We have to copy and then paste. The reason is now we have the formula, but we want the name to be able to search it. I paste it already. Now it will ask me as what, and I paste it as values. And look at the text box here. What happens is we get the species name, which is what we want. Now we can also make this a little bit bigger because we want to actually be able to read it. And let's do it Latin as well because, well, Latin, italics as well, because this is what Latin is usually written like. Now for the next step, we are freezing this top row again. So it's, well, just the top row, please. So we're freezing the top row because we want to state this with us in case we scroll down in the document. And then I add the trips at the end. And now I can start to add my species. So I talked about glis glis. This is the species I actually saw on this trip. We have glis glis, and I have seen it in Austria on this trip. Now we get an error message. It's the number stored as text. Why is that a problem? Excel cannot calculate values based on texts, so we should convert it to number. And only then this formula down here actually works. If we pull it over, we see it works, but we don't want to do that each time. So we mark the next columns and we format the cells and put in number here. You don't want 1.00, so you're just putting that to 0, and then that should be fixed as well. Now let's put in some more species. We also saw a beaver. We saw the European beaver, and so on. Now, if you're actually done with your species list, you can sort and filter and sort. Make sure you press expand the section. And there we go. Well, sometimes that has to be adjusted after again because the sorting messes up the formula. But we do have the Latin name and the common name in one place. What I always do when I come back from a trip, I do this, and then I can also adjust the number of lifers, which is an information I sometimes add then to this Excel as well, something like that. Although these were not lifers, of course, but still nice to see. Now we have that, we can copy paste the Latin and the common names, and I call that sheet my trips, and we can paste that. I would make sure you're not wrapping the text. There we go. And then probably put the Latin name after the common name. So now we have the common name, Latin name, place, and maybe remarks. You fill that out. The beaver I saw in Vienna. The edible dormouse I would have to actually look up, but was close to Neusiedler See. That one I found with the thermal. And just like that, click on that to give it the space it needs. And maybe make it fat. The title. Now if we take that and we paste that into Word, we can paste it as a picture. We already have a basic species list that is sorted quite nicely according to the taxonomy, but also includes the different common names and the Latin names and so on. Now, if this is not pretty enough for you, you can fiddle around here with the borders, for example, but this is up to personal choice. It does look a bit nicer if you include all borders, for example. It's basically up to you and to your preferences how we do this part, but this is how I get the species list done. Even for big trips with many species, I can combine my live listing with the species list, and if I'm done with that, I can sort again. Ta-da! And if I now wonder about my total number, I have to adapt this again to N2. Yeah, well, I shouldn't have gotten into that by now, but I have to fix that later. It is Excel, so sometimes you have to be a bit patient with it, but it's a way to make your species list quite quickly.